I'm doing a show that I don't actually want you to watch, that I don't want you to listen to. Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and I just got back from a trip to Melmac, and let me tell you, the conversion from dollars to Wernick, it really killed me. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always, at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at LockedOnFantasyBasketball. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA and get $20 off your first purchase. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free, and we are available on all platforms. So give us a thumb up and a double bang and a comment, all that stuff. So, what am I talking about? So I said at the start, I don't want you to really watch this show. I don't want you to really listen to this show. It's not true, obviously, because I want you here and I want you thumbing and banging and all that sort of stuff. Quick couple of housekeeping things. Locked On Fantasy Basketball is back. If you made the Battle Royales last season, or if you are a Basketball Monster member, the invites are out. You received an invite. If you made the Battle Royale, check your email. It is there. Those invites will expire in 10 days. So by the sort of end of next week, I'll revoke those invites and give those spots to somebody else. If you're on Basketball Monster, there are links in the Basketball Monster forums. Under the forum topic that says Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl, there are 3 links to a 9-category head-to-head Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl, to a points league Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl, and a new 8-cat roto Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl. Click those links and join up. Public invites next week will start to come, and you'll find the information through this show. So that's all coming out. That's a little bit of housekeeping stuff. You already know what the title of this show is. You've seen it. It says punting and pairing. Who's the best player to pair with your first round pick? And the reason why I don't really want you to watch this show is this topic gets brought up a lot. It gets asked of me a lot. There are people who do a lot of work on this, and it's just one of those things that I just disagree with. I disagree with a lot of this stuff. And that's okay, because we all have different approaches to it. I don't disagree with the idea of punting. I think punting in head-to-head leagues, even if you are against punting, I can almost assure you at some point you will be punting. That's just how it goes. Because it's really just a distribution of resources. Should I spread things out to try and be okay in 9 categories? Or can I just concentrate that into 8? And use my resources to be better in 8? Makes more sense. There's no logical explanation against that part of it. How you execute it and the ways that you approach that and how you define that is, I think, where we sometimes get into debate. So we're going to talk a little bit about what punting is. I'm not going to do full punt, what is a punt show, because I've done that in the past and I think we don't really need to go too much of that, but we will talk about it. The thing is pairing, and I'm going to talk about that part a little bit later on and give you my ideas of why I think that everything that I say in this show, the pairing part, needs to be taken with some of the biggest grains of salt, dead sea level amount of salt of what I am saying. I'm doing this show. Again, this is counterintuitive to what I'm trying to do. I'm not here. This is the information that you need to win your fantasy league. You would never find it anywhere else. Right? That is not what I'm saying. Obviously, I could be. I could lie to you guys, and sometimes people criticize me and they think, man, this guy only does stuff because he just wants, he just says stuff and he just lies about players' values because he wants clicks and people to do it. Yeah, I'd never do, by the way. And I am here actively telling you that the stuff that I'm going to go through now, I don't believe as such. I'm deliberately telling you what I do and don't believe, which I always do. So, we're going to talk about the pairing. We're going to talk about punting. We're going to talk about all that stuff and the ways that you can debate it and disagree, which is totally cool too. No one has solved anything here. We all just have ideas. So let's talk about punting. Let's talk about pairing. Let's talk about what it is, why it is, how you do it, why you should, why you shouldn't do it, why you could do it, why you might not do it. All of those potentially interesting things. So what is punting? It's only something that you do in category leagues. Let's get that out of the way. If you're in a points league, this does not apply to you for a single second. Not a single part of this show applies to you in a points league. Not a single part. And usually everything will apply to all leagues relatively equally. Does not apply to points leagues at all. Punting is ignoring a category. It is not making that category worse. It is ignoring a category. It is diverting your resources to something else. It might be ignoring two categories. You do not avoid a player who is good in the category you're punting. That is not what this is about. And that is the difference that you get. Well, I'm punting free throws. I've got to get the bad free throw players. No, you don't. Absolutely do not. Do not need to do that at all. Punting is a better strategy in head-to-head than roto leagues. It still can be done in roto leagues. And the general rule of thumb of punting in roto leagues is the deeper the league, the deeper the rosters, the more competitive the league, the more viable punting is in a roto league. The shallower the league, the less competitive the league, the less viable and the harder it is to win with punting. If you're in a 16-team roto and everyone is absolutely locked in at a similar skill level and ball knowledge, punting works and works well, or can work well. If you're in a 10-team league and it's somehow roto and people don't know what they're doing, well, punting you won't win. You might be good, you might finish third or fourth, but you won't win. Head-to-head leagues, I think there's always going to be a point where you need to punt at some point. Hard, heavy punts will mean you don't finish top of the standings, but you'll have a great chance of winning in the playoffs because you've only got to win 5-4 in a playoff matchup. But when you win 5-4 during the regular season, you get no 6-3s or 7-2s to bump you to the top of the standings. But that's okay, as long as you qualify. Like I said, we're not diving heavily into the idea of, or even the different parts and strategies necessarily of punting here. We'll briefly touch on some of it. And I think as we go through the pairings, I'll be dropping little bits and pieces about some punting strategy. But the key thing I want you to understand, it's got nothing to do with points league. So again, there will be someone still watching this go, well, how do I do this in point? You don't do it. It's nothing to do with you. I want you to get out of this show, unless you just want jokes. Punting is just pretending a category does not exist. A player's good at it, whatever. He's bad at it, whatever. Doesn't bother you. You might win it some weeks. And there'll be people here who have never drafted Giannis in a head-to-head league and say, well, you lose free throws every week. There'll be people here who have drafted Giannis and say, well, I actually won it 4 times out of 16 in the regular season last week. Not a big amount, but you can. It's possible. Even with Giannis on your team. You can do it. It's not impossible. There's so much weekly variance that happens. To me, the idea is me, giant positive guy, massive positive person, which I actually am. Not everyone thinks that. The idea of punting is not to make categories worse. It's to make categories better. It's to make them stronger. It's so you don't sit in the variance zone, a term I just came up with, the old VZ. The VZ is the area where you sit around an average of a category. Well, my team's projected to hit 2 threes a game and 5 rebounds and get 3.8 assists with 1.1 steals and 0.7 blocks and shoot 48 and from the field and 80 from the line. And that's pretty good. It's pretty average. You're in the massive VZ there because you sit in that middle zone and like anything can happen during the week. All it takes when you sit average is for your guy that averages 1.1 steals to average 0.7, which is like 1 fewer steal in a week. 2 of your guys to do that, and then that category where you were average and you were close to beating some people, it just turns like that. Punting means get things strong. Insulate. You're strong in these categories. Instead of sitting average, instead of averaging 1.1 steals, average 1.7. Instead of shooting 48 from the field, shoot 52. Instead of shooting 79 from the line or 80, shoot 86. Make it so that you insulate yourself from variance, from injuries, from schedule vagaries. So the categories you're good at. That's the idea. That's the idea behind all of that. We're going to come back and talk about the thing again that I get asked all the time. And I'm going to try and dispel what I think are not myths necessarily, but ways that I think you can make mistakes and become hyper-focused on the wrong things when we're talking head-to-head drafts and team management. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience is the formula for winning championships. It is also what keeps your ride or die alive, and I think you know that. I'm not talking about your best mate, your missus. I'm talking about your car, because that's the most important. That's the loyal thing, isn't it? Sure, maybe someone says that somewhere. I don't know. Who cares? Anyway, exhaust kits, LED headlights, bumpers, fluffy dice, flame decals, big exhaust kits, superchargers, nitrous. Is that a thing? I don't know cars, but eBay Motors does, and that's all that matters. They've got over 122 million parts available for your car or number one ride or die, depending on how you want to frame it. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, that part that you get is guaranteed to fit your ride, or you get your money back. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to US customers. Thank you very much. Don't know why I said it that way. Apologies. I love eBay Motors. I love them. Has anyone ever called their car a ride or die? Or, hear me out, maybe, I know this is a trend people do on TikTok, is they deliberately say something that's weird or pronounce something wrong so that people comment on it, boosting them up in the algorithm. I don't know. Is that what do people? Yeah, I know that people. Maybe I should start doing that. Should start pronouncing something wrong. Just throw a weird word or a weird term in so someone comments on it and it bumps up in the algorithm. Feels a little cheap, but you never know, do you? All right, so we're talking punting. We're talking pairing. So what do we mean? What is the general idea of pairing? The idea of getting behind it didn't make sense on the surface. It's an ideal combination of players. So you take your guy in round one and go, well, who do I get in round two? That's the thing that people always ask. Man, can you just do a list of the first and second round pairings? All right, that is what the idea is. To me, and there are others that think this, there are others that don't. I think that it is unbelievably overblown and not important. I don't think that the marginal value that you might create, and I think that is negligible, if not irrelevant, it's not worth that time and effort to really focus on that. The way that you structure a good team, the way that you build a good fantasy team is in a couple of ways. It's finding value picks. It's finding the guys who you end up getting at a spot that maybe is 50 spots worse than what their actual value ends up. Hitting on breakouts, getting the waiver wire, being active. It's got nothing to do with pairing. It's just taking someone good or someone you think is going to be good that is being slept on or sliding and getting value out of it. I think that's one of the big ways of winning. Pairing is all well and good. But to me, it's a 10-player scenario. It's how do I make my first and second and third and fourth and fifth and sixth and seventh and eighth and ninth and 10th player fit together. And I reckon almost without fail, whatever you do in round one, whoever you take in round two, especially with the way the league currently is, I think you can take almost anybody in round two within reason. You're not taking old mate Harrison Barnes at pick 15 because you will lose, and that's the reverse of finding value. But you take anyone who's in that, let's say, 10 to 27, 30 range or whatever it is, because like we've said many times, the way that the league sets out the value of players is there's probably 30 guys who are theoretically third round players and not many who are back end first or second round value guys in comparison to the top. So there's a large range. My overall long-winded point here, long-winded ass, whatever, something long, something winded, is that you could put whoever you want in round one, whoever you take, and put them with almost any single player in round two, almost without question, and I can still build a good team out of it. Almost without question. And I think you'll see that when I go through these pairings, that there is going to be someone either in your head or someone else's head that when I put the pairing up, you'll go, but what about him? What about this guy? Wouldn't you use this guy? Wouldn't you pair him here? And the answer is yes, I would. I'd pair any of them. You can get away in so many directions. There are two main ideas or schools of thought, I think, with how you build out punting teams. Is that, and I think you've got to do a bit of both, but do you lean, we'll use a punt free throw example to start off with. Do you lean heavy in the round two and go, well, who's a guy here whose value is suppressed by his bad free throws. And you just load up on that player and build your strengths. That's one way of looking at it. A punt free throw guy is usually a rebounder, a shot blocker, a high field goal player. So do I look to get that again in round 2? Or, and this is the way I'm starting to think more and more is viable, is that categories are interlinked. There's correlations. We know this. I've done this. The numbers don't change about this. So like if you're punting there's groupings of where players sit. So if you're punting assists, for example, assists are very highly tied to free throw percentage. They're tied to points. They're tied a little bit to threes. They're tied a little bit to steals. Probably more so threes than steals. The correlation is not as high as steals, but whatever. They're all tied together. So if you go into a draft and you're discounting the players who get assists because you're punting assists, you're going to find it really hard to get your threes up, your points up, your free throw percentage up, and your steals up. So the other way of looking at a punt is, I'm punting assists. I didn't get a big number assist guy in round 1. So in round 2 and round 3, I've got to make sure I get the other categories that are associated with that. Free throw percentage, 3-pointers, scoring, steals. I need to get them because then later on, the other stats which should build my strength up, rebounds, blocks, field goal percentage, because I've punted assists early on, I'll get them in later rounds. 2 completely diametrically opposed ideas of doubling down on strengths in round 2 and round 3, or going against those strengths and filling out the gaps that might become too big to overcome later. Now, if you're punting a 3 or 4 category scenario, which you can do if you want, it's harder and it's not for the faint-hearted usually, but then you don't worry about building up those categories. Like if I'm punting blocks and I don't start to look at where do I get a rebounder, where do I get a field goal percentage player, and I just start loading up on guards, I am not getting those categories back, and I am punting 3-4 categories. So that's a different way of looking at it. But again, I think every little thing that you do, every decision you make in round 2, round 3, that changes the decision you make in the next round, which then changes the decision you make in the next round. And your decision tree becomes massive. You pick your guy in the first round, and you might have, let's say, 5 or 6 possible options in round 2. And then depending on which one of those guys you went for, you might have 15 options in round 3. And then for each of those individual ones, you might have 20 options in round 4 and 25 options in round 5 and 30 options in round 6, leading to just, it's not infinite, but it's not far off level of combinations of players that can work. So I don't want you to get bogged down in what I'm saying here in terms of I'm going to throw out a pairing and I want you to look at it and go, that's great, but we can also do it with 10 other guys. Guy, can we, I know you can't answer me in real time here, but can we agree on that? I hope so. Let's look at what you do. And I'm going to do the first round 12-team league using Yahoo ADP, just going down who's ADP 1, who's the second ADP, third, fourth, all the way down to 12. That's how I'm going to do it. And then I'm going to look at guys who theoretically could be available at that range. So if I'm picking at 1, that means I'm picking it at 24. So realistically, the guy whose ADP is 23 might be available at 24. ADP 23 doesn't mean this guy is never available past this. It is average, perhaps halfway. So I'm going to go like 1 back on ADP. If I'm picking at 24, anyone with ADP 23 or lower is in play for me here. That was a very long, I think necessary discussion. Maybe it wasn't necessary. Maybe I was too long-winded ass there. If I'm picking Victor Wembanyama at pick 1, which is the ADP, I'm considering a Damian Lillard in that spot on the back end, because again, I think when we talk about Wemby, one of his categories as a big man that probably struggles a little bit is going to be field goal percentage. So Wemby punt field goals, you got blocks in hand already. That's fine. When you punt field goal percentage, you often do find yourself lacking in rebounds and blocks, and Wemby covers those for you already. So you're getting someone like a Lillard, which helps to boost Wemby, which is he's a little bit down in assists. Makes sense to get Dame there. Bump your assists up, get your threes up to a better volume. You're not worried about the field goal percentage position here. And Wemby's, again, a little bit or somewhat unique in that he's a big man whose field goal percentage is not strong. So that enables you a different way to work through that. But again, there are so many players who sit in that zone, in that 20 22, 23, 24 zone, and the differences between these players in these areas is just not big. Like if you wanted to take, who available at that spot, like Darren Fox has got an ADP of 26, right? You take him there. His free throws aren't particularly strong, but that's okay. We work on that through other areas. If Tyrese Maxey was there, you could take him. You could take Paul George. You could add to Jaren Jackson and then not worry about a single block for any other player basically at all. You could do that if you wanted to. Then you're scoring, then you look at it and you go, my scoring's a little low. I need to address that in round 3. Every move you make is about addressing what the deficiencies are, what's available left on the board at each point. And go, okay, you hear me do this in mock drafts. Okay. I'm a little bit down in my assists here. I'm down in my rebounds, but assists are going to go. I need to grab one there and I'll grab rebounds later. And that's all about what this is. So again, put anyone with Wemby. We'll figure it out in the coming rounds. Pick 2 is Big Chungus, Nikola Jokic, who I think you could make a couple of different arguments here about which direction you would go. With Jokic, you could punt threes. He's not a high-volume three-point shooter. You could punt blocks as well, which punting blocks with Wemby not on your team is a very, very smart idea. Again, with all of this, there is nuance. If you are in a league and someone else has Wemby and every one of you decides to pump blocks, right, the value in that decreases. Because then if you just become okay in blocks, you win that category 10 times versus, and you lose it against the Wemby team, yeah. So you just get your blocks to be okay. And then you figure out the other stuff that enables you to beat Wemby's team in other categories. And you've got that free win in other spots. So, but if everyone else is not punting blocks, if the people are trying to chase, and you see that there's a guy that goes with Chet and then Jaren in round 2 and 3, you go, okay, well, that guy is trying to get blocks, so that pushes me down to 3rd there. So I'm still like, I could be 3rd, or I could push down to 7th, or whatever it is. Work out where you prioritize what you do. As for Jokic, again, you can pump blocks. His blocks aren't bad. They're around average. They're not bad, but they're not good. And he's a center. Or you could punt threes. I think James Harden makes sense. He's got an ADP of 22. And I think, when we're talking about the back end of this round, of round 2, like Harden could easily, to me, go at the top of round 2. Honestly, he could. Harden gives you a really strong assist bump playing with Jokic. The field goal percentage would be pretty much offset by Jokic. The free throws become really strong. Your rebounds are pretty good. Harden's a good rebounder. Harden's threes actually sort of cancel out some of Jokic's stuff. But again, give me 10 different guys here and we'll make it work. Who else would you put with Jokic? Again, I know that there are all you're going to be sitting here watching this or listening to this and go, well, actually, I would use him here. I would use him here. There is nothing perfect about the guy that you add because you have 11 other players on your team. And the importance of those players does decrease each round that you go. That is true. But they still are important. And round 3, 4, and 5, the value of those guys combined is much more important than round 2. So making sure that everything else makes sense, I think is useful. It's important. At the moment, the 3rd player in terms of ADP is Luka Doncic. That's not... People obviously don't care about a 2-game playoff week. Whatever. Totally up to you. If that was my finals week, I would go a different direction. If it was my first week, playoff week, I'd be okay with it. If it's in roto, I don't care in the slightest. Doncic improved his free throw percentage last season. Doesn't mean that it's always going to be great. It might be, but it definitely doesn't mean that. So I think we get into the season and if we're approaching a Luka team, look, we could punt blocks. Obviously, that's going to be an option for so many of these different teams. Is we can come in here and we can punt blocks. That's totally possible. But what if Luka goes back to being a 76% guy? Then we need to start accounting for that. So I think LeBron, who sits at an ADP of 23, would make sense. You are the rebounds, the assists, the scoring for both of these players is both really big. LeBron upped his 3-point volume last season. Again, you're not trying to make your free throws worse, but you don't care if Luka has a down season here. You don't care if LeBron has, or if they have a good one. What a bonus that is for you. Luka's field goal percentage is not unbelievably strong, but it's not terrible. LeBron's is strong. You sort of, this is one of those ones, again, a combination where I could throw 10 other guys here, but a combination of these guys that you are strengthening the strengths. And because these first three players, and part of the reason why they're so good in fantasy, Wemby, Jokic, Doncic, is that they do statistical things that their position usually doesn't. Wemby, big man, blocks the shots, doesn't get field goal percentage, but gets assists and threes that the volume doesn't always come. Jokic, big man, doesn't block shots, but gets assists. Luka, point guard, big rebound player. Right? That's not a usual combination. So it's just about slightly different things that they do. And this is more and more prevalent in the NBA these days with the differences in player statistical contributions versus traditional ideas. If I'm at pick 4, not if I'm at pick 4, if the Yahoo ADP tells me I'm at pick 4, which, I was, in this spot, we're going to go with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And Shai's one I think is relatively easy in terms of what we'd look to punt. It probably is threes. He's not a high volume guard in terms of hitting threes. That's not what he does. I think his assist rate is going to go up this season. I don't really think there's a big debate about that at all. But we're pairing him here, I think, with Scotty Barnes, whose 3-point shooting improved and then fell off last season. And Barnes is, again, a big man who's an assist player, but gets steals and blocks and rebounds as well. Just weirdo type combination players, which I think is, something that has pretty strong value across fantasy. Barnes' ADP is 20, so maybe he's available at this spot. Barnes could also go at pick 12. He could go at pick 13, and that's okay. One of the things on a complete side note here is that when you are talking pairings and focusing in, you paint yourself into the I must have this guy corner. What if I do if I don't get Scotty? He fits perfectly with Shai. Yeah, let me throw you 10 other names who are fine and we can figure it out. If you paint yourself into the I must have this guy corner, and then that paint then you have to get that guy and it goes early, then you paint yourself into the next I must have this guy corner, or it's like, well, I didn't get Scotty. Who's the next guy who fits a similar build and he's 20 spots lower in terms of overall value? And you go, well, I've got to have him because he fits the build. You're in real trouble. You got to have flexibility, and you got to understand that it's not about that first two combination. I mean, it is about the first two combination because they're important players, but they don't have to dictate every other pick after that on a very structured level. Every decision that you make in the draft alters what you do with the next one, and there are myriad of options to be able to make that decision most of the time. Today's episode is also brought to you by the Game Time app. Live events, we love them. Is it music? Is it theater? Is it comedy? Is it sport? It's probably sport because that's where you are and what you're listening to here. Well, Game Time's got so many solutions for you, including their new thing they've got, Game Time Picks. It makes getting the tickets that you want for your favorite events, live events, it makes it easier. Instead of having to sift through all of the different options, and Game Time has heaps of them, Game Time Picks throws the best options up to the top, so you can just go through and go, well, here's the value. It's already done the work for me. You don't have to sit through and compare and figure out which ones are actually good and which ones are actually bad. It is right there for you. When you go to Game Time Picks, that's a great option. They've got some of the other options too, the flash deals, the zone deals, all-in pricing, which you toggle on in the app. You flick on that setting, and it shows you all of the full price on the ticket instead of having to wait till checkout for fees to be added. You see where all the fees are. It's just right there. No confusion, none of that stuff. Game Time, just every single time they come out with something good. The lowest price guarantee. So if you find that same ticket somewhere else, you get credit of 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. I don't know how ready you guys are for a trip inside my brain, but I do these shows when I know that people love to hear it and I don't agree with it. I always go, this is a terrible show. I sit here and I'm doing it and go, this is really bad. What am I saying? What is the point of this? But I want to put something out that people want to hear, and I want to put it out there and then say to you, please don't stick to it. And I think that's more of a PSA than anything. You want to click on it and you want to talk about it and you want to see the name, but then I'm going to bang through into your head. Please don't hammer yourself into a corner. Don't paint yourself there and go, well, I can only do this now. You cannot. There are so many different things that you can do. And a hyper focus on a player, on a strategy, on a build will almost guarantee you a loss. Almost. It won't guarantee, because again, we can figure our way out of so many different situations that we can get into in a fantasy scenario. With the fifth guy on Yahoo's ADP list, it is Giannis. Even though his ADP is 6, he's the fifth highest guy, unless you're including Pele Larson, who has an ADP of 1 for some reason. I guess he's been picked in one rookie draft that someone was taking the piss on, and he got picked at 1. Don't know why, but he sits there at 1, and Scottie Pippen sits there with an ADP of 2, so that's great. Surely that'll adjust at some point, but I don't know. That's where it sits currently. We're talking pick 5, and that's Giannis. That's the obvious thing. You are punting free throws. Now, you could say, there are people who say, well, I'm never drafting Giannis because I have to punt threes, I have to punt turnovers, I have to punt free throws. You do not. You absolutely do not. Threes are the easiest thing to recover from. It's so easy to do. You can actually win free throws. It requires a lot of good free throw shooters. But the rest of your team is an 83% free throw shooter team. You actually become average. You're an average free throw team, and so you're not punting it anymore. You're in the VZ, the variance zone. You're not good at it. You're not bad. You're average. So let's just say we're punting free throws with Giannis. The obvious thing, people would then go, well, yeah, why I can grab LeBron in round 2 because he might be bad at free throws. That's true. You could do that. You could do that. Remember, you don't have to target to make it worse. And Fred VanVleet is a very good free throw shooter. Now, Fred VanVleet's ADP sits at 39, so you probably don't even need to get him here. I'm just telling you of a way that you look at this. I think he's a very clear second-round player, Fred. ADP of 39 suggests that people think he's a fourth-round guy, which is just bonkers to me. Absolute insanity to have him there. But the reason one of the main reasons I wanted to put him here is it's a different approach. Giannis is a rebound guy. He blocks some shots. He gets some assists, but he scores, and his field goal percentage is through the roof. Now, is Fred VanVleet's bad field goal percentage enough to drag Giannis's down? Not really. We can also figure that out in other areas. Is the fact that Fred is a good free throw shooter, does that mean anything? Not really. Because Fred's free throw shooting is not the reason that he's a good fantasy player. It's his assists, which are strong. His steals, which are good. And he hits good volume of threes. He's a decent scorer, but he's not a super high scorer. And adding that combination, when you're with Giannis and you are punting free throws, you can get sucked into hey, where do I get my threes from? How do I make sure I'm getting enough assists here or enough steals here? And Fred helps to put you on that right path, I think. But you could go, guess what I'm going to say? You could go in a lot of different directions at this spot. There are many different players you could go for. And honestly, sometimes the guys with the massive, massive negatives in a standard Z-score ranking, which, again, I think that some of that is not right, but that's okay. With those gigantic negatives, I think that gigantic negative overstates the negative impact. But also, when we're talking about this, is that in the past has been one of those ones where it's like, well, you definitely, if someone's got a really, really, really big negative, you don't want to add them to a player whose key singular strength is that one category they are bad at, because it probably doesn't balance out enough and you've wasted the best value of that player. VanVleet's value is not through free throws. He's good at it, but that's not why you draft Fred VanVleet. You're drafting him for those other things that can help out. At pick 6, ADP would suggest that Tyrese Halliburton is going in this spot. Out of the guys in the first round, we also know this to be a very strong fact, is that the highest scorers go in the first round or second round. And if you are a 20-point per game scorer in round 1, recovering to catch up to the others is really hard to do, because they're 27-point scorers, 30-point scorers, 32-point scorers. And that becomes really difficult to get back. So you might have to be like, well, I'm probably not going to compete in scoring. So let's try some other stuff. Let's add James Harden. Let's draft James Harden with an ADP of 22. Let's get 2 potential double-digit assist players here. And because you know what we know later is a lot of the guys who are rebound players, a lot of the guys who are field goal percent players later on, a lot of the guys who are blocks guys, because you might not be punting blocks here. A lot of the guys that are blocks guys, you know what they also are? Low usage players who don't score much. So that's okay, because you're trying to let's get some assists, let's get some threes, let's get some free throw percentage with Halliburton and Harden. And when we need to grab some rebounds or blocks later, we've got a really good free throw percentage buffer here. But we also don't care that they score Mitchell Robinson 4 points a game. Or Pirtle's 10 or whatever. Because we're already sort of saying we don't care too much about that. We've focused on other areas. Or you could choose 10 other players at that spot. At 7, Anthony Davis seems to be the ideal pick. I would have Davis at 6 personally, but the ADP is currently behind Halliburton. I would have Davis at 6. I think with AD, you punt assists. You can listen to whatever you want from coaches and teams, and apparently there was a quote from JJ Redick saying, we want to make Anthony Davis an offensive hub. Cool. But why? This question comes up, and comments come up so often, right? And my pushback is always going to be, why would you try to make Anthony Davis his passing offensive hub when LeBron James, D'Angelo Russell, and Austin Reeves are all still on this team and in the starting lineup, and they're all better at that than Anthony Davis? Much better. What the hell's D'Angelo Russell doing if he's not passing? Nothing. Why is he out there? Why would you make an offensive hub through a guy who's not a passer whatsoever? It's all well and good to improve some of his passing, but it's just not a realistic thing that he's going to transform into that player. We hear it so many times of these random things. Oh, I want him to do this. Do you? Oh, that's cool. That makes absolutely zero sense from a competitive standpoint. Side note. Of course, always a side note. So I think Davis is a punt assist guy. Now, you'll say that Devin Booker was the Suns' starting point guard last season, and I'll say you're right, he was. I think he's still going to be playing some point guard this season. I don't think it's Tyus Jones full-time, as you're probably well aware of my thoughts on Tyus Jones and what his value looks like this season. I think Booker with an ADP of 19 makes sense. Yeah, Booker might be a 6 assist player. That's okay. But what else is he bringing? Well, he's hitting threes. He's got a really strong free throw, and Davis jumped his free throws up last season, but it could be iffy. He's not a terrible field goal percentage player, Booker. And he scores really well. Also, he's just good. And you know what I like to get to pair with my first good player? A second good player. And Booker is that. So I don't mind that Davis has got low assists and Booker's not a bad assist player. It's okay to put those guys together. It's okay to do that. You might have 20 other guys, again, that you can put here. And I would hardly argue against any of them. Whatever option you would say, hey, I would actually add Davis here. Okay, yeah, good idea. Yep, that's fine. That works. Because it's about what you do after it. It's what you do in 3, 4, 5, 6. Do you start looking at it and go, well, here I am sitting in round 4, probably going to take a flyer on Tyus Jones. I go, please. That's where you screw up. It's not about the perfect pairing. It's avoiding the terrible pick that is more important in regards to success. Have I said it enough? Yep. Will I continue to say it? Yes. Pick 8. ADP suggests Joel Embiid. I would not pick Joel Embiid until pick 12, personally. I would not do it this early. Embiid's a different one because there are some guys that you don't want to take with him. I'd say you're probably punting threes with Embiid, although you can find threes in so many different areas. But he's a great field goal, great free throw, scores through the roof, rebounds great, solid enough assists. You could punt assists with Embiid as well if you wanted to. If you want. I'm going to add Scotty Barnes as a combination here as well. Barnes is not going to be a three-point scorer. He's going to add blocks and steals from a position that gets assists, which is a weirder combo. But if you are going to decide that Embiid's a punt assist guy, you don't add Barnes here. That doesn't make a ton of sense necessarily. Because Barnes, the other thing that ties into assists is usually threes. And it's not like Barnes is getting you big volume of those. So it wouldn't make 100% sense in that setting. Barnes' ADP is 20. He could work here with Embiid if you wanted to. Like Barnes' range is like take him at 12, 10 if you want. Take him at 24 if you want. We don't know what the usage looks like with Quickly or Barrett necessarily. That's okay. We can deal with that. I think he's an okay player to take here. Again, do you build the strengths? Do you try and cover the things that might become weaknesses later on? Both are viable. And you've probably got to address both of them, those strategies, in your first 3 to 4 picks. So if you go with a guy in round 2 that perfectly adds to the good categories of your first round pick, in round 3, you've got to address those other weaknesses. And if you, in round 2 and 3, address the weaknesses, then you've got to build your strengths again. One of the bad mistakes you can make is taking a guy in round 1, Tyrese Halliburton, and then you get to round 7, you go, well, you know what? I actually have to punt assists. That's bad. I can't get my assists back. I'm cooked. And that's about every round. It's a rebalance. It's a reassess with what you're doing. In round 9, or pick 9, sorry, Jace Tatum's ADP suggests he would go here. I would suggest with Tatum, you could say you're not punting anything, and that's totally reasonable too. Eventually, you'll get to a stage where you'll see you're mid in so many different categories, and you probably want to commit a direction, and I would do that. And the earlier you do it, the more intentional you can be with the moves that you make. But that is, again, completely up to you. There are plenty of ways to win, multiple ways to win, in fact, in fantasy leagues. Because of the presence of Victor Wembanyama, there's always an option that punt blocks is a viable strategy. That's always an option. Because Wemby exists and he's going to be, you're tearing that category apart so often. I think Donovan Mitchell at ADP 17 makes sense. I could also see Mitchell falling outside the top 20. It all depends on how you want to value it. Mitchell's assists helps boost Tatum. You get some nice scoring and threes. The free throws make sense. He's not a blocks guy. Could you add a rebound player here? That sort of zone of a draft doesn't have a ton of rebounds. Like, would LeBron go okay there? Yeah, he'd be fine there. Do you want to take LeBron that early? Maybe, maybe not. But I think he would make a lot of sense. As per usual, there are just many different ways that you want to go. Feel free to just cut to the bits of this thing that show the pairings of each pick. But the reason I'll continue to say this is because people skip over bits and they don't hear. So let me tell you again, please don't narrow yourself into these picks. Please don't. 10 options of every pick. At number 10, Goose, Anthony Edwards is going here. We can all sit and argue about why Anthony Edwards is not even a top 30 9-cap player. Again, I've always got my great examples of this. Of if you are going to use straight 9-cap rankings, there are certain things you have to be willing to say out loud and admit to believing. And one of my good ones this year is that you think that Tobias Harris was an 80-spot better player than Julius Randle last season for category leagues. You have to say out loud that you would have preferred Max Strus on your team by 3 rounds nonetheless than Paolo Banchero. If you're willing to walk the walk and say those things and believe in those things, then sure, you can go by a straight 9-cap ranking because that's how those rankings played out. If you think that Walker Kessler had a better category league season than Julius Randle by 50 spots, then fine. Quote to me straight 9-cap rankings. But if you think those things are complete nonsense and obviously not how reality is reflected, then you can't sit here and tell me I'm not taking Anthony Davis because he's never been or Anthony Edwards, he's never a top 30 player, or Josh Giddey's not a top 100 guy. Because you can't just pick and choose the numbers that you like if that's the ranking system you're going to rely upon to provide your argument. Now, I do think that people go too hard on Edwards or too high on Edwards. He can easily become a 28 point per game scorer by getting to the line 2 more times, 3 more times, and we're good. It's possible. But he might not. But his minutes are secure, his usage is secure. He's probably a punt field goal player. He's not a high assist player. He's not a high rebound player. But you know who is? Domantas Sabonis. He's a very high rebound player. He's a high assist player. He's not a high scorer. And the DeRozan thing with him is up in the air. We don't know what happens. And you have to watch the scoring with Sabonis, obviously. But his ADP is 14. He's going to be available in this spot. He might not work out at all. That's possible because he might get completely cucked by DeRozan. I don't know. But he just adds some little bit of extra flavor here. And even though you're punting field goals and Sabonis is good at that, you're adding in some rebounds. And also with Edwards, the field goal's not terrible. The field goal's not terrible. And I just don't mind taking Anthony Edwards in that. 10 I probably would blanch at it, but I'm definitely going to be higher on Edwards than a lot of other people are just from a manipulation of numbers perspective. At number 11, we're looking at Steph Curry. That is where he is currently being drafted. I have some worries about Steph this season. Older, obviously. I worry about his increase in offensive load and usage, leading to some breaking down stuff. I worry that there were some slips from Steph last season from a shooting perspective. What if at age 36 that he's not able to maintain 43% three-pointers and 50% from the field? I don't really think that's a crazy thing to think. But still, he's going here. And I think you've got to punt blocks. And you know who never gets blocks but will add to the other big man stats of field goal percentage and rebounds? Well, it's my mate Domantas Sabonis. He does those things. He provides them for you. Good for him. Fantastic. He's able to bring those things to the table and make sense. But I could throw anyone there. You wanted to go Don Mitchell there? Cool. You wanted to take LaMelo Ball in any of these spots? You could have. I didn't include LaMelo here because his ADP sits at like 29. I know that people are going to be super scared. And the same as Kawhi Leonard. That's why I didn't include any of these guys in round 2. And they're probably the 2 guys you wouldn't take with Joel Embiid. More so Kawhi because, I have my reasons why I'm more worried about Kawhi's knee than I am LaMelo's ankle. But they're probably the guys you don't want to stick together in most of those cases. The final pick of the first round, going by ADP currently, is pick number 12. Well, that's ADP doesn't change that. Pick number 12 is still always going to be the final pick of round 1. But Trae Young is the guy that sits there. And I'm not going to lie to you, there's very little difference between what Trae Young does and what Steph Curry does. So the guy that I would pair with Trae Young is probably the same guy that I would pair with Steph Curry, and it's Domantas Sabonis. Or, hear me out on this one, there's about 6 or 7 other guys that I could add into that spot, and I think I could work it out. I think we could figure out what else to do. Novel concept. So Sabonis could work alongside Trae Young there. Or any other number of other players, someone from that first round group who falls, or someone else you want to jump into that zone, or you want to go a flyer on Jim Harden, or you want to take whoever. So many different directions that you can go. I apologize, again, if this show just doesn't, because it doesn't come off that as well to me as I would like it to, mainly because of, I don't like to just be saying, all of this is wrong. But I do think it is important to be able to have that discussion about maybe we need to watch what we focus on. And we need to be aware that it's not pick 1 and then pick 2 and then everything is decided. Because it's not. And pick 2, best player available, is another phrase that people will always throw out. And I think you know what I'll say here. That's great if you choose best player available, but how do you decide who the best player is? And the answer in nearly every position is you can't. The differences between these guys might be 0.1 steal. Which 0.1 steal per game, I haven't worked this out. Maybe I should just work this out right now as we sit here and try and work it out. What is 0.1 steal? Let's figure this out. 0.1 steal. Let's make the player a 70-game player. Yeah, that's 7 steals for a season. In a 20-week year, that's 1 steal a week. And we look at them and go, well, this guy, if he gets 1.1 extra steal, he goes from 0.9 to 1. He goes from a bad steals guy to an average steals guy. It's 7 steals. And then he's the 40th best player. Now he's the 29th best player. And now he was a great pick in round 3 before he was a bad pick in round 3. I hope that some of these thoughts and ideas you don't just dismiss out of hand. You can at least listen to them and go, yeah, okay, I can see how I don't have to narrowly focus in. Or you look at it and go, Josh, there is someone I definitely want here, and I'm going to make it work. I win my league, and that is absolutely cool as well. What I don't want is for you to think that there is only one specific way of doing something. That there is the only way you can do it is by a hyper-focused, narrow pairing, and that is all you can do. There is only one way to do something, and that is just not true. I hope we get to that. Guys, we are done here. Apologies about the length. Apologies about the show. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. If you still are, see ya.